The V3 hegemony had ruled the Orion sector for 12,000 years, and they believed themselves to be the masters of all living things. Their empire stretched across 900 worlds, and their fleets darkened the skies of any planet that dared to resist their will. They were tall creatures with gray skin and for eyes that could see in complete darkness, and they moved with the cold confidence of predators who had never known defeat. For centuries, the Velry had collected species from across the galaxy. They called it scientific study, but everyone knew what it really was. They took beings from their homes and placed them in facilities where scientists could examine them and learn their secrets. The Velry believed that knowledge was power, and they gathered knowledge the way other empires gathered gold. High Commander Yathel stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the blue planet grow larger on his viewing screen. This world was called New Helsinki by the humans who lived there, and it was a small colony on the edge of their territory. Only 40,000 humans called this place home, and they had built a peaceful settlement with farms and schools and homes where families lived simple lives. What do we know about these humans? Yathel asked his science officer. They are a curious species, High Commander. They live very short lives compared to us, rarely more than 100 years. They are fragile and weak in body, but they breed quickly and spread across the stars faster than our models predicted. Our scientists wish to study their young ones to understand how they develop. Yathel made a sound of approval and waved his hand to signal the attack. He did not think much of this mission because it was simple collection work that his soldiers had done 1,000 times before. The humans were a minor species with a small fleet and no real power in the galactic community. What could they possibly do against the might of the hegemony? The strike teams descended through the atmosphere in the dark hours of the night when most of the colony was sleeping. They moved like shadows through the empty streets and made their way toward the learning center where the children gathered during the day. The building was quiet now, but security scans showed that many young humans remained inside for what they called a sleepover event. Captain Vex led his team through the doors, and they found adults first, teachers and caretakers who had stayed to watch over the children. Jumped to their feet with fear in their eyes. One woman ran toward a communication panel to call for help, but a Velry soldier cut her down before she could reach it. The other adults fell quickly after that because they had no weapons and no training for combat. The soldiers moved through the building and collected the children one by one. Some of the young humans screamed and cried while others went silent with terror. The Valkyrie did not understand why the adults had fought so hard or why the children made such loud sounds of distress. To them this was simply a collection mission like any other. They gathered 47 children between the ages of 6 and 12. Each child was placed in a stasis pod that would keep them asleep. During the journey to Velry space, the soldiers carried the pods back to their ships and loaded them into the cargo holds with the same care they might show for valuable equipment. Captain Vex reported to High Commander Yathel that the mission was complete, 47 specimens secured and all resistance eliminated. The High Commander approved of this report and ordered the fleet to return home. As the Velry ships rose into the sky, they left behind a scene of horror. The bodies of teachers and caretakers lay where they had fallen, and the learning center stood empty and dark. Families would wake in the morning to find their children gone and their protectors dead. The colony's emergency signals began to flash as the first responders arrived to discover what had happened. A young communications officer named Eric Lindquist was the first to send a message to Earth. His hands shook as he typed the words because his own daughter had been among the children taken. He had rushed to the learning center when the alarm sounded, but he arrived too late to do anything except see the Velry ships vanishing into the stars. The message he sent was simple and short because complex words would not come to his broken mind. It read, "Only this, they took our children, those." For words traveled across the vast distances of space at faster than light speed, and they reached Earth in less than an hour. They arrived at the Unified Defense Command headquarters, where officers worked through the night, monitoring humanity's colonies and borders. A young lieutenant received the message and read it 3 times before she understood what it meant. She ran to wake her commanding officer, and within minutes the message had reached the highest levels of human government. Presidents and prime ministers and generals gathered in emergency sessions across the planet. They watched the footage from New Helsinki that showed gray-skinned aliens carrying pods filled with sleeping children onto their ships. Something changed in humanity that night. It was not anger exactly, though. Anger was certainly part of it. It was something older and deeper, a feeling that came from the very core of what it meant to be human. Every parent who watched that footage felt it in their bones. Every person who had ever loved a child felt the fire ignite in their heart. The Valkyrie had made a terrible mistake, but they did not know it yet. They flew home with their cargo of stolen children, and they felt satisfied with their successful mission. Their scientists prepared their equipment and their holding facilities, and they looked forward to studying these new specimens. They could not imagine what was coming for them back on Earth. The human leaders finished their emergency meetings, and they reached a decision that was unlike anything in their history. There would be no negotiation with the Valkyrie. There would be no diplomatic talks or economic sanctions or strongly worded protests. There would only be one thing, and that one thing was the complete focus of every human being who drew breath. They would get their children back, and they would make certain that no alien species would ever consider doing something like this again. The price the Velry would pay would echo through the galaxy for 10,000 years. Every civilization would learn the lesson that humanity was about to teach. You do not take human children. The preparations began within the hour, and humanity went quiet. Their communications fell silent, and their diplomats returned home. Across the galaxy, other species noticed this silence, and they wondered what it meant. They would learn soon enough. Galactic Assembly was a grand hall that floated in space at the center of the known universe. Representatives from 300 species gathered there to discuss trade and treaties and the business of civilization. Eclair's throat was a place of endless talking where words flowed like water and nothing ever seemed to get done. Ambassador Clear's throat. Chen Wang had represented humanity in this hall for 15 years. He was a patient man who had learned to play the long game of galactic politics. He smiled when he wanted to scream, and he spoke softly when he wanted to shout. This was the way of diplomacy, and he had mastered it well, but on this day there would be no diplomacy. Chen Weiming walked into the assembly hall and every eye turned to watch him. The representatives had heard rumors about what happened at New Helsinki, and they waited to see how humanity would respond. Would there be angry speeches and demands for justice? Would there be calls for sanctions against the Velry hegemony? The human ambassador said nothing at all. He walked to his delegation seats and gathered his staff with a simple gesture. They collected their documents and their personal items, and they followed him toward the exit. Chen Weiming did not look at anyone as he walked, and he did not respond to the questions that other ambassadors called out to him. At the door he stopped and turned to face the assembly one last time. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with something that made even the oldest representatives feel afraid. He gave a small bow that was more insult than courtesy, and then he walked out of the hall. The doors closed behind him, and humanity was gone from the galactic assembly. Across the galaxy, human merchant vessels received coded signals, and they changed course immediately. Cargo ships abandoned their trade routes, and passenger liners canceled their scheduled stops. Every human ship in space turned toward home, and they did not explain why to anyone who asked. The communication buoys that humanity had placed throughout the sector fell silent. One by one, these devices had carried human messages and broadcasts to every corner of explored space, but now they transmitted nothing. It was as if humanity had simply vanished from the galactic community. The Valkyrie High Council observed these events with mild interest and considerable arrogance. Supreme Leader Cathon sat upon his throne of black stone and listened to reports from his advisors. They told him that humanity was making noise about the collection mission and that their ambassador had walked out of the assembly. This is expected behavior, Cathon said with a wave of his clawed hand. Lesser species always protest when we take specimens. They make angry sounds and send threatening messages, and then they do nothing because they know they cannot challenge our power. The humans will be the same. His advisors nodded in agreement because they had seen this pattern many times before. The Velry hegemony had faced protests from dozens of species over the centuries, and nothing had ever come of it. Why would the humans be any different? High Commander Yathril reported that the specimens had arrived safely at the research station on the 7th moon of Velar Prime. The children were awake now, and they were being held in comfortable quarters while the scientists prepared their equipment. Everything was proceeding according to plan. On that distant moon, the 47 children huddled together in a large room with white walls and bright lights. They did not understand where they were or why they had been taken. The youngest ones cried for their parents while the older children tried to comfort them. A girl named Sophia, who was 12 years old, appointed herself as the leader, and she told everyone that help would come. Our parents will find us, she said with a confidence she did not entirely feel. Earth will send ships and soldiers, and they will take us home. We just have to be brave until they get here. The Velry scientists observed the children through cameras, and they took notes on their behavior. They found it fascinating that the young humans organized themselves so quickly, and that they seemed to draw strength from being together. This was valuable data that would be included in their Studies far away from that moon and far away from Velry space, something was happening that the hegemony could not see. Humanity had not gone quiet because they were afraid or because they had given up hope. They had gone quiet because they were preparing for war. Fleet Admiral Amaro Conquo stood in the command center of Earth's unified defense command. She was a woman of 60 years with gray hair and dark skin and eyes that had seen too many battles. Around her stood the joint chiefs of every human nation, and they waited for her to speak. "We do not negotiate," she said in a voice like iron. "We do not warn them or give them a chance to prepare. We retrieve our children and we make certain that no species in this galaxy ever considers doing this again." Is there any disagreement? There was none. The vote was unanimous and the orders went out across human space. What the galaxy did not know was that humanity had been hiding their true strength for decades. They appeared to be a minor power with a modest fleet and average technology. They were clever traders and adequate soldiers, but nothing remarkable by galactic standards. This was exactly what humanity wanted everyone to believe. Truth was very different. In secret shipyards hidden in asteroid belts and behind gas giants, humanity had built a fleet unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Their engineers had studied every piece of alien technology they could find, and they had improved upon it in ways that should have been impossible. Their weapons were devastating, and their ships were fast, and their soldiers were trained to a level of skill that bordered on madness. All of this had been hidden and kept in reserve for a day that humanity hoped would never come. They did not want war, and they did not seek conquest. They only wanted to live in peace and raise their children in safety. But now someone had taken their children. The secret shipyards opened their doors and the hidden fleet emerged into the light. 300 warships that had never been seen before took their positions. Information. Their crews were ready and their weapons were loaded, and their mission was simple: bring the children home, destroy anyone who stood in the way. Admiral Akinquo watched the fleet assemble on her tactical display, and she felt pride swell in her chest. These ships and these soldiers were the best humanity had ever produced. They were the response to a nightmare that every parent feared and every child trusted would never happen. Set course for V3 space, she commanded. Maximum speed. We have children to save. The fleet jumped to faster than light speed, and they raced toward the enemy. The stars themselves seemed to blur as humanity went to war, and still the Velry did not know what was coming for them. Nexus Station was the largest military outpost on the border of Velry space. It was a massive structure of metal and stone that housed 50,000 soldiers and a fleet of 200 warships. The station had never been attacked in all its centuries of existence because no species was foolish enough to challenge the might of the hegemony. Station Commander Crystal sat in his control room and watched the sensor displays with bored eyes. Nothing ever happened at Nexus Station except routine patrols and supply deliveries. He had requested a transfer to a more exciting posting many times, but his superiors always denied him. Commander, one of his officers suddenly shouted, "Sensors are detecting something strange. Multiple contacts appearing out of nowhere." Crystal leaned forward and stared at the display. One moment the Space around the station had been empty, and the next moment it was filled with ships. They appeared so quickly that the sensors could barely track them, and there were so many that the display turned red with warning lights. How many ships? He demanded. 300 warships. Commander, they are human vessels. Crix felt his eyes go wide with shock. This was impossible. Human ships could not travel this fast, and humans did not have 300 warships. Every intelligence report said that humanity was a minor power with limited military strength. What was happening? He had 17 seconds to wonder about these questions. Then the human fleet opened fire and Nexus Station began to die. The weapons that struck the station were unlike anything the Velry had ever seen. Great beams of blue energy cut through armor that was supposed to be unbreakable. Missiles that moved faster than sensors could track slammed into the hull and exploded with devastating force. The station shields failed in seconds, and its weapons barely had time to return fire. Commander Crystal watched in horror as his command fell apart around him. Explosions rocked the structure, and fires broke out in every section. His soldiers tried to reach their battle stations, but the attack was too fast and overwhelming. The 200 warships of his fleet attempted to launch, but human vessels destroyed them before they could clear the docking bays. In less than 10 minutes, Nexus Station was a broken wreck drifting in space. Thousands of Velry soldiers were dead, and the survivors sent desperate distress signals that no one would answer in time. The human fleet did not stop to accept surrenders or take prisoners. They simply advanced through the debris field and continued toward the heart of Velry space. Across the hegemony's frontier, other outposts met the same fate. The humans attacked everywhere at once, and they gave no warning before they struck. Defense fleets that had stood for centuries were annihilated in hours. Colonies that had never known war suddenly found human warships in their skies. Supreme Leader Cathon received the reports in his throne room, and he could not believe what he was hearing. Nexus Station destroyed, the Third Fleet eliminated, the border colonies falling one after another. This could not be happening. This was not possible. How are they doing this? He screamed at his admirals. They are prey species. They live barely a century. Their technology is inferior to ours. How are they moving so fast? How are their weapons so powerful? His admirals had no answers. They stood before their supreme leader with fear in their eyes, because they had never seen anything like this. The Velry had conquered dozens of species over the millennia, and they had never faced a foe who fought like the humans fought. The humans did not follow the normal rules of warfare. They did not stop to secure territory or establish supply lines. They did not negotiate or accept surrenders or show mercy to defeated enemies. They simply destroyed everything in their path and kept moving forward. Admiral Vesklul tried to explain to the Supreme Leader why this was happening. The humans are not fighting for territory or resources, he said with a trembling voice. They are fighting to retrieve their young ones. This changes everything about how they wage war. They do not care about losses or risks. They do not care about what happens after they achieve their goal. They only care about getting their children back. Cathan did not understand this explanation. The clear's throat. Children were just specimens for scientific study. They were valuable but not so valuable that any rational species would wage total war to recover them. Why would the humans sacrifice so many lives and so many ships for 47 young ones? Humans are not rational, Vessel replied. At least not when it comes to their offspring. Our scientists have studied their history and they found something disturbing throughout their past. Humans have burned cities and destroyed civilizations over their young. They have fought wars against each other for the crime of harming children. This is not strategic behavior, it is instinct. It is something deep inside them that they cannot control. The supreme leader felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had ruled the hegemony for 3 centuries and he had conquered species that was stronger and smarter than humans, but none of those species had ever looked at him the way the humans looked at him. In the recordings from the battles, their eyes held something that went beyond hatred and beyond anger. It was something primal and terrifying. The human fleet continued its advance and nothing could stop them. Every Valkyrie force that stood against them was destroyed. The humans invented new tactics during the battles and they improved their weapons while they fought. One admiral reported that human ships were actually getting faster as the campaign went on, as if they were somehow upgrading their engines in the middle of a war. 11 days after the attack on Nexus Station, the human fleet reached Velar Prime. Kevin stood at the window of his palace and watched the sky fill with enemy ships. There were more of them now than there had been at the start of the war because human reserves had joined the main fleet. The hegemony's home defense force moved to intercept, but everyone knew it was hopeless. The humans had come for their children and they would not be denied. The supreme leader turned to his advisors and saw the fear on their faces. They had no plan and no hope. The greatest military power in the Iran sector was about to fall to a species they had dismissed as weak and insignificant. What do we do? Cathan asked in a voice that sounded nothing like the mighty ruler he was supposed to be. No one had an answer. Supreme leader Cathan had ruled the Valkyrie hegemony with absolute power for 300 years. His word was law and his commands were obeyed without question. He had crushed rebellions and conquered empires and made entire species bend to his will. No one had ever defied him and lived to tell about it, but now everything was falling apart. The human fleet surrounded Velar Prime like a ring of fire. Their warships blocked every escape route and their weapons were pointed at the planet's surface. The hegemony's defense force had been scattered and destroyed in a battle that lasted only for hours. Now there was nothing between the humans and their goal except the will of one desperate leader. Kevin called an emergency meeting of his high council, the great lords and admirals and scientists of the hegemony gathered in the throne room. With fear written on their faces, they had never seen their supreme leader look so uncertain, and they did not know what to do. We must use the children as shields, Kevin declared. We will move them to the capital city and place them in the central palace. The humans will not attack if they know their young ones will be killed. This is our only leverage. Some of the council members nodded in agreement. This was a logical strategy that had worked against other species in the past. Hostages were valuable tools in negotiations, and the humans obviously cared deeply about these particular hostages, but other council members looked horrified at the Suggestion, Admiral Vesklul stepped forward with his head bowed low. Supreme Leader, I beg you to reconsider. Everything we know about humans suggests that threatening their children will only make them more dangerous. They will not negotiate and they will not back down. If we harm even one child, they will destroy us completely. Then what do you suggest? Kevin snapped. Should we simply surrender and give them everything they want? Should the greatest empire in the sector bow before these primitive creatures? Before Vesklul could answer, a communication signal flashed on the main display. The humans were sending a message directly to the throne room. Cathan hesitated for a moment and then ordered the signal to be accepted. The face of Fleet Admiral Amaro Kunquo appeared on the screen. She was an older human female with gray hair and dark skin and eyes that burned with cold fury. She did not look like a diplomat who had come to negotiate. She looked like an executioner who had come to carry out a sentence. Supreme Leader Kevin, she said in a voice that could have frozen stars, I will speak only once, so listen carefully. You took 47 of our children from their beds. You killed the people who were protecting them. You brought them to your space, and you kept them like animals in a cage. Cathan tried to interrupt, but Akono continued without pause. We know you are planning to move the children to use as shields. I am telling you now that this would be a fatal mistake. If a single child is harmed, we will not stop. At your military, we will reduce every Velour world to ash, every colony, every outpost, every ship. We will hunt your species across the galaxy until none remain. This is not a threat. This is a promise from a species that remembers. The transmission ended and the screen went dark. Cathan stood frozen in place. He had received threats before, but nothing like this. The human admiral had not been angry or emotional. She had been calm and certain, like someone stating a simple fact. She truly believed that humanity would destroy the entire Velry species if the children were harmed. And looking at what the humans had done in just 11 days, Cathan realized that she might be right. The council erupted into chaos around him. Half of the members demanded that the children be executed immediately to show strength. They argued that the hegemony could not bow to threats from inferior beings. If they surrendered now, then every species in the galaxy would think them weak. The other half pleaded for immediate surrender. They had seen the human fleet in action, and they knew that victory was impossible. Better to give up the children and accept whatever punishment the humans demanded than to see their entire civilization destroyed. Keithan tried to restore order, but no one was listening to him anymore. His admirals argued with his lords, and his scientists screamed at everyone. 300 years of absolute authority crumbled in minutes as the council fell apart. Silence, Cathan roared. I am your supreme leader, and you will obey me. But his words meant nothing now. One of his admirals, a young officer named Krezel, stood up and pointed at the supreme leader with open contempt. You are the one who ordered this collection mission. You are the one who brought this disaster upon us. Why should we follow you to our deaths? Guards moved to arrest the admiral, but other officers stepped in to protect him. Suddenly, there were weapons drawn in the throne room, and the situation was spiraling out of control. Cathan watched in horror as his own people turned against each other. The chief scientist grabbed Cathan by the arm and pulled him. Away from the fighting, they fled. Through a side door and into a private corridor while sounds of battle echoed. Behind them, you do not understand what you have done, the scientist whispered. We studied humans for decades. We watched their history and learned their ways. They are not like a supreme leader. They do not calculate costs and benefits when they're young or threatened. They simply attack until the threat is eliminated. But why? Cathan demanded. Why would they risk everything for a few offspring? They can make more children. It makes no sense. The scientist shook his head with something like pity in his eyes. That is exactly why we should never have taken them to humans. Their children are not just offspring. Each one is precious and irreplaceable. They will burn the galaxy to save a single child. We triggered something ancient and powerful inside them, something that cannot be reasoned with. Cathan felt all his strength drain away. He had been supreme leader of the mightiest empire in the sector. Now he was running through the corridors of his own palace, while his council fought itself to pieces. His fleet was destroyed and his people were divided, and the humans were waiting in orbit to finish what they had started. He had lost control of everything, and the only thing that could save his people now was the thing he had never done. In Clear's throat, 3 centuries of rule he would have to surrender. Commander Sarah Euler and checked her weapon one final time and looked at the 11 soldiers who stood beside her. They were the best warriors humanity had ever produced, and they had trained their entire lives for missions like this one. Each of them carried enough firepower to destroy a small army, and each of them would die without hesitation to save the children. Remember the mission, Olerin said in a steady voice. We get the kids out safely. Nothing else matters. If you see a Velry soldier, you put them down fast. No hesitation and no mercy. These are the people who stole our children from their beds. They do not deserve our kindness. Her team nodded as one. They had all seen the footage from New Helsinki. They had all watched the Velry soldiers carry sleeping children onto their ships while the bodies of teachers lay on the ground. Every one of them had felt the rage that burned inside all of humanity. The drop ship descended through the atmosphere of the 7th moon and landed on the surface near the research facility. Very defense forces moved to intercept, but human warships in orbit destroyed them before they could get close. The path to the children was clear. Euler and led her team through the facility doors and into a maze of white corridors. They encountered Velry guards almost immediately, and the fighting was brief and brutal. Human weapons tore through alien armor and alien bodies fell to the floor. The team moved forward without pausing to check if anyone was still alive. Sensors show the children are on the lower level, one soldier reported. There are 20 guards between us and them. Then we go through 20 guards. Euler and replied. They descended into the depths of the facility, and the resistance grew heavier. The Valkyrie knew what was at stake, and they fought with desperate ferocity, but desperation was no match for skill and rage. The human soldiers cut through every obstacle like a blade through paper. At last they reached the holding wing, where the children were kept. A massive door blocked their path, and a squad of V3 elite guards stood ready to defend it. These were the best soldiers the hegemony had to offer, and they had orders to die rather than let the humans pass, the battle lasted exactly 90 seconds. When it was over, the elite guards were dead and the human team had suffered only minor injuries. Oil planted an explosive charge on the door, and the blast tore it from its frame. She stepped through the smoke and into a large room with white walls and bright lights, and there they were, 47 children, huddled together in the center of the room. They looked up with white eyes at the human soldiers who had come for them. For a moment no one moved or spoke. Then a girl named Sophia, who had kept the others brave, stepped forward. "You came for us," she said in a voice that trembled with hope. "You actually came." Commander Euler dropped to her knees and opened her arms. "Of course we came," she said with tears streaming down her face. "We will always come for you, always." The children rushed forward, and the soldiers caught them in their arms. These hardened warriors who had burned their way across an empire fell apart at the touch of small hands. They produced ration bars and blankets and stuffed toys that had been carried across the stars. For this moment they wrapped the children in warmth and safety and promised them that the nightmare was over. Euler lifted a small boy who could not stop crying and held him against her chest. "It is okay," she whispered. "You are safe now. We are taking you home." The extraction was smooth and quick. Human dropships landed outside the facility, and the children were loaded on board with the greatest care. Medical officers checked each child for injuries while soldiers stood guard against any threat. Ships rose into the sky and raced toward the fleet that waited in orbit. On the flagship, Admiral Okonkwo watched the dropships approach, and she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The mission was complete. The children were safe. Humanity had kept its promise, but there was still one more thing to do. Supreme Leader Cathon was brought before her in chains. He had surrendered unconditionally just hours ago after his own council had turned against him. The Valkyrie hegemony was finished. As a military power, their fleets were destroyed and their empire was dissolved, and their worlds would be watched by human forces for generations to come. Cathon looked at the human admiral with something like confusion in his eyes. He still did not truly understand what had happened. He had ruled for 300 years, and he had never imagined that his empire could fall so quickly. "Why?" he asked in a broken voice. "Why did you do all of this for 47 children? You destroyed an empire that stood for 12,000 years. You killed millions of my soldiers. Was it worth such a price?" Akono looked at him with cold contempt. "You will never understand," she said. "And that is why you lost." She turned away from the fallen leader and prepared for the final task of the campaign. The Galactic Assembly had gathered to witness the aftermath of this war, and they needed to hear a message that they would never forget. Admiral Akono stood before the assembly with the rescued children safely aboard ships bound for home. Representatives from 300 species watched her with mixed expressions of fear and respect and curiosity. They had all seen what humanity could do when pushed too far. "Today you learn something about humanity," she began. "We are not conquerors, and we do not seek empire. We ask only to live and trade and explore in peace. We want to raise our children and build our civilization and take our place among the stars." She paused and let her gaze sweep across the hall. "But understand this, every species has a line that must not be crossed. Ours is our children. Cross that line, and you will face the full measure of what we are capable of, not because we are cruel, but because some things we will never allow, some prices we will always pay, some fires we will always light. Her voice rose with power and conviction. Let this be the last lesson any species needs on this matter. The Valkyrie did not believe us, and now they are gone. Do not make their mistake. Leave our children in peace, and we will be the best friends you ever had. Threaten them, and we will be the last enemy you ever face. She stood tall and proud as the assembly sat in stunned silence. And across the galaxy, a new rule was understood by every species that drew breath: never touch human children. This was the lesson that would echo through the stars for 10,000 years. This was the warning that would be passed down through generations. This was the truth that the Valkyrie learned too late. Humanity had come for their children, and nothing in the universe could have stopped them.